Hail Internet, it's Matt here for the Dork Lords. If you're new to the channel, welcome. We talk about all manner of dorkly things here, whether it's sci-fi, fantasy, superheroes. We probably have a playlist about it. Feel free to check us out. Today is another in our Dork Lord of the Rings segments. And I'm going to be giving my quick reaction to episode 3 of The Rings of Power, Adar. Paul and I will do a deeper recap later in the week. It's funny, in the recap for episodes 1 and 2, I mentioned that the best chance for fans of the books to get on familiar ground, something approaching the canonical story, was in the plotline involving Elrond, Celebrimbor, and Durin. Mainly because that plot will likely feature Sauron's deception, the crafting of the rings, the resulting war, the origin of the ring wraiths. So, cool, I'm in. And when you know it, that's the one plot line they skipped this episode. Like, blast! Next week. I think I enjoyed the Arondir scenes the most this episode. Some good action scenes. The warg looked funky, but the orcs looked great. The violence level was certainly up this episode. Some visceral combat deaths and a nasty arm break. I liked the teamwork of the elven prisoners, trying to get one elf free. And of course, we get a blurry version of the episode title character right before the end credits. He's searching the Southlands for a weapon. It seems obvious that weapon is Theo's sword. Numenor looked epic and breathtaking. I still think the show is heading in the direction of Halbrand as Sauron, which I'm not crazy about. They tried to set him up as a mini Aragorn in this episode, the rightful king of the Southlands who must return to save his people. And we do see Halbrand and Galadriel leading a cavalry charge in the trailers, presumably in the Southlands at the end of the season. But that would only be in the 8th hour of a 50-hour story, so something has to derail his Aragorn arc. Being Sauron would do that. But put a pin in this because it connects to a crazy, so impossible that I'd win the internet if it's true theory that I'll mention in a second. As a lot of the Tolkien community predicted, Sauron's symbol was a map of Mordor for the orcs to follow. Perfectly fine. But then, why was that symbol carved onto Finrod's body back in the First Age? In story terms, it was so Galadriel could recognize it. But that doesn't really make sense. Did Sauron leave it for her to find? Or did he expect a bunch of orcs to inspect Finrod's body and think, we should go to Mordor? Which, by the way, Sauron wasn't anywhere near Mordor at the time. Galadriel, or any orc who managed to figure out the code and travel the incredibly long distance between Finrod's death site and Mordor, would have been waiting a hell of a long time for Sauron to arrive. So it kind of feels a little like lazy writing. I think the worst moment of the episode was the baffling slow motion shot of Galadriel riding a horse. You know, there's Chariots of Fire slow motion, and then there's slow motion. It was like, what? I don't think that scene achieved what they wanted it to. Let's put it that way. I like Elendil's character. He's a bit different canonically as well, of course. But I like the portrayal. Miriel should know who he is, but I think that was probably the show's way of introducing him to the viewer. One change from the books that I think everyone can agree on, Elendil isn't 8 feet tall. That would have been awkward. And Miriel would have even less reason to not know who he is. Who's that guy in the back? What, you've never noticed him? The starting center of the Numenor basketball team? Anyway, 6-foot Elendil, just fine. I think the Harfoot storyline was my least favorite this week. We learned that the lovable, caring Harfoots are actually terrible people. Are they the villains of this show? They begin with this chant, nobody walks alone. And I believe them right up until they said, oh, you have a broken ankle? We're leaving you to die. Like, that was a 180. He's not a racehorse. They have carts. I guess they don't have domesticated pack animals yet, but there are plenty of people to help pull the family cart. The only thing bigger than our feet is our hearts. Unless you're a mild inconvenience to the group. I mean, have they ever heard of a splint or a crutch? Add that to the fact that they read out the names of the dead or abandoned Harfoots, And they laughed at the guy who'd been stung to death by bees. I mean, what a terrible way to go. Ah ha ha, idiot. Like, wow. I mean, you can imagine some family member of his sitting there like, what the? Anyway, apparently Harfurs are like survival of the fittest with some happy songs. Okay, now for crazy theory time. This involves what I assume will be the season-ending battle in the Southlands between Númenóreans and Orcs. And let me just say that I don't think this is likely in its entirety, but it would make sense of a few bits of evidence that we've seen. First, the battle featuring Númenórean cavalry will probably be in the 7th or 8th episode. So this will probably result in a cliffhanger for season 2. It seems unlikely to me that all will go well and the Southlands become liberated, since they are in effect in Mordor. Let's assume that whether it's Halbrand or someone else, Sauron will reveal himself and brutally turn the tide of the fight. Okay, in the trailers, there are a number of shots of Galadriel against a solid red background covered in ash. There was even a dead horse in the background of one of those shots. I always assumed this was from a flashback to some First Age battle. And it still might be. But those shots were notably absent from the flashback montage to start the season. What if those shots are from this end of the season battle after Sauron has decimated the good guys? More evidence. At Comic-Con, we were told that Galadriel's armor was a gift. When she shows up at Númenor, she's only wearing a dress. When she leaves, she's wearing the gift armor. That's the same armor she's wearing in the cavalry charge, and the same armor she's wearing covered in ash. Hence, the red sky scenes are almost certainly at the end of the season. The red sky and the abundance of ash makes me think Sauron has used fire, which leads to the crazier part of this theory. Most people assume that the stranger is a Maya spirit. Many think he's Gandalf. Could be. Some think he's a Balrog, perhaps even Durin's Bane. Let me read you a quick quote from the Silmarillion about Melkor's use of Balrogs. For of the Maiar many were drawn to his, Melkor's, splendor in the days of his greatness, and remained in that allegiance down into his darkness. And others he corrupted afterwards to his service, with lies and treacherous gifts. Dreadful among these spirits were the Valaraukar, the scourges of fire that in Middle-earth were called the Balrogs, demons of terror. So Melkor recruited multiple Balrogs to his service. One of the trailers for this series did show a Balrog, and I do think the show will be unleashing Durin's Bane in Moria, though canonically that should be a Third Age event, so be it. If the stranger is a Balrog summoned by Sauron, it appears that he's been turned by the Harfoots. He calls them friend. So, I don't think he's going to be helping Sauron anytime soon. But something bothered me in the trailers and continued to bother me in episode 1. The flight of the meteor. How could a meteor fly over Lindon, the Southlands, and Rovanion? I mean, maybe the writers just didn't care about the physics of it. Or maybe the explanation is that it wasn't one meteor, it was 2. One landed in Rovanion, the stranger, and the other in the Southlands. Hence, the tide-turning reveal at the end of the season, turning the Southlands battlefield to ash, could be a Balrog. There's your crazy theory, which will likely be proven wrong in episode 4, but there it is. So, in any case, that's my reaction. Thanks so much, everybody, and I'll talk to you next time. Bye!